Hello there. Well, this is your old friend Kennedy Brown again, and I'm going to be reading mine because Dutch Sheets reads his, and he's got a big following, so reading it can't affect the following, I don't think. So, and a lot of people would rather listen to something than they would try to read it themselves. So I'm going to read it to you. And this is a rather a seasonal topic. It's called, Is God Against Christmas? That's probably going to raise a few eyebrows and maybe even a few question marks. But let me go ahead and explain. Is God against gift giving? Honoring the earthly birth of his son? Is he against celebrated experience of family? Is God against Christmas? As a general, broad consensus of what God has revealed of his character, the answer must be no. But, however, now, just a minute. Let me get into the meat of this. There is other truth that God has revealed to his chosen, which must also be taken into account before entering into unrestrained celebration of the questioned December day. Nowhere in Scripture does God establish on his earthly lunar calendar a day for observance of his physical appearance here on earth as man. When you think about it, for man to arbitrarily establish such a day is really quite arrogant, I say, and presumptuous. Why? Okay. It's as though God, by coming to earth as a man, has somehow been qualified for the right to recognition as God. We tend to forget God said, "Let us make man in our image." Did not our image include the Creator Father, Son, and Spirit? He tells us in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4, that he is Echad, one. He is one God. The Son existed from the beginning with the Father and the Spirit. He did not begin to be God with his earthly human birth. John 1:1 tells us that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. Of course, that Word is Messiah, is Jesus. God, however, does have an annual event calendar. He tells us we are to faithfully observe. There are 7 annual events that he wants us to celebrate. Passover, unleavened bread, first fruits, Shavuot or Pentecost, trumpets, Yom Kippur, which is also called the Day of Atonement, and Sukkot, which is also called Tabernacles or Booths. There's one other calendar event that he repeatedly calls us to observe on a weekly basis, the seventh day Sabbath. And by the way, Shabbat Tov Mishpachah, which in the Hebrew says, good Sabbath, family, for today is Sabbath. Scripture does not, now back to my premise here, Scripture does not instruct us to observe the birth of even Abraham or Moses or King David. Yeshua, Jesus, is definitely a cut above these, humans being fully God. So to celebrate his earthly physical appearance seems to somehow diminish his eternal existence and preeminence. None of the apostles, think about this now, none of the apostles make any reference to celebrating Yeshua or Jesus' birth date. Did they even know it, I ask? Obviously no reference to it, and none of them were probably there in that manger scene when he was born. They were yet to be called, some 30 or so years away. So today, 2,000 years later, we can only estimate or speculate when Yeshua's birth could have occurred. So let me walk us a little bit through what that speculation might be. So we can deduce from Scripture that a timeline, but that timeline is pretty sketchy. Luke is the only New Testament author who attempts to establish a timeline. He starts by recording the details of the miraculous birth of John the Baptist to the temple priest Zacharias and his then barren wife of many years, Elizabeth. Let me lay a little more foundation, a little background here. King David, nearly 1,000 years earlier than Zacharias, in preparation for the staffing of the temple that his son Solomon would build, organized the priesthood as it existed at that time, the Levitical priesthood, which did all the temple work. He organized them according to the Levitical family lines. He established 24 divisions, which by implication means there were 24 family lines that were recognizable at that time. And so that allowed each division, or order as they are sometimes called, to serve for 2 weeks each year. So you have 12 months, basically 2 weeks in each month, so 2 times 12 is 24. Okay, so each family then had allocated 2 weeks, and the Abijah, which was the family line that Zacharias belonged to, was the 8th order, so that put him, 2, 4, 6, 8, put him in the last half of the month of Tammuz as the timeline starting date leading up to the birth of Yeshua. And that's established in Luke 1, chapter 1, verse 8. Now, according to Luke, back to Luke again now, after my little interjection there of some Levitical history. According to Luke, Zacharias went home after his 2 weeks of service. Of course, you can read the story, but you remember he was lost his voice. He couldn't speak because he had doubted what the angel had told him. So he went home mute and apparently engaged in some physical activity with his wife because she conceived. And then the chapter Luke goes on to tell us that Elizabeth became pregnant, but didn't say anything about it. Speculation on why that might have been, but she didn't say anything about it for 5 months, which then puts the pregnancy into the month of Kislev. That's in November or December. Now, the reason that we can't say specifically the month is because, as I think I'll explain later, we deal with a solar calendar. That our calendar is based on the sun and the equinox, whereas God's calendar is a lunar calendar and it's based on the moon cycles. So that's why you can't exactly put a date on the lunar calendar on the solar calendar because they're not in sync. So that kind of explains. And really, actually, you could almost right there say, well, it's almost impossible then to pick the day of Messiah's birth. But we'll continue. So Luke states that in Elizabeth's 6th month, so that's going to be Tevet in December, which falls in December to January, then Mary became pregnant with Messiah, with Jesus. That's in Luke chapter 1, verse 26. The birth month of Yeshua, 9 months later, obviously, that's the normal gestation, would then be in the 7th lunar month of Tishri. Now that falls year in and year out, somewhere in September or October. So Tishri then is the month in which fall the feasts, those feasts that I mentioned earlier, two of the feasts fall in Tishri, Yom Kippur and Tabernacles or Booths. And Tabernacles is the last of the feasts, and it's an 8-day feast. Excuse me again. It seems likely Mary and Joseph could have been on the way to attend that feast. Well, cough, cough. Although one of the Gospels, I forget which, said that they were going to register and had to go back to their birthplace to register. So, I may be speculating that they were going to attend Tabernacles, but it is possible. But it's not relevant to the birth necessarily, except it would be a nice coincidence if Messiah was born in Tabernacles, because, guess why? Because Tabernacles is prophetically the time when the 1,000-year millennial reign, the return of Christ, is to occur, and that will in effect be like the Feast of Tabernacles. We've celebrated so far the 5 of the 7 feasts, and we have yet to have Messiah return, the judgment, and the 1,000-year millennial reign. So let's go back now to my text here. I'm interjecting a little bit more. Ad lib, amazing, huh? The Roman pagan feast of Saturnalia, Saturnalia, which was celebrated around the winter solstice in late December. It had been observed at this, well, I skipped one paragraph here. Let me go back and pick that up. Why then did the early church pick the specific day of December 25th when, even from the text, you can't pick a day, let alone even the exact month on our solar calendar. So I think the reason that this December 25th was picked was all because of the Roman Emperor Constantine, who you have heard of, I'm sure, the emperor who in 325 AD or about that time made Christianity the official religion of Rome and pretty much ended the persecution of the Christian church at that time as far as Rome was concerned. So anyway, Constantine was the one that set the December 25th date. Why? And that was what I was about to tell you. That was because of the pagan feast of Saturnalia, and I think that Constantine was trying to, he hated Jews for one thing. That's pretty well documented, his hatred, his anti-Semitism. He hated Jews. He decreed that Sabbath couldn't be observed. You couldn't, even if you were a Christian, you couldn't observe Sabbath, which the Christians were doing at that time, because Sabbath was the day that should be observed, and as the seventh day that God had decreed. But Constantine said, no Sabbath celebration. You have to work on Saturday. And then he also said you can't celebrate any of the Jewish feasts. And that's two reasons. Then he set Christmas as December 25th as the day to celebrate Messiah's birth. And that was, I think, a political choice also, because he was trying to placate his pagan constituency, which, the vast majority of the Roman culture at that time was still into paganism. Christianity would slowly start becoming the state religion, but that would take probably 200 or 300 years before it was pretty much the true cross the population religion. So let's see, now I'm going to get back here to where I was. So so he substituted, the Ishtar, the pagan celebration of goddess Ishtar, for Passover, and he substituted for Saturnalia, coincided that with Christmas, so that he had then two pagan feasts and Christian celebrations at the same time, placating both constituencies, so to speak. And apparently the Christians were relatively illiterate as far as the scriptures go. The books of the New Testament had not been canonized very long, and of course we didn't have printing presses for several hundred years yet, so the scriptures weren't widely distributed, and people just didn't know. So then, what about celebrating Christmas as Jesus' birth? Looking at the lack of any scriptural precedent to do so, and considering that Luke's calculation would quite likely place the birth at least 2 months earlier than December 25th, why celebrate an unlikely event, is my question. As an additional consideration, it almost seems like a further affront to God to place the birth of his Son on man's solar calendar. God, through his word, only makes reference to his lunar calendar. Most pagan events are observed according to the solar calendar. So to place Messiah's birth on the solar calendar would make it fall on a different day every year on God's lunar calendar. So if Messiah was born, which he was obviously, on a specific day on God's lunar calendar, that would be a different day every year on the solar calendar, because very rarely do they coincide in the months. So as I've said, I don't believe that God is opposed to the gathering of family and friends, exchanging gifts and feasting. But I say, don't try to give the event an aura that it cannot sustain, it cannot justify. I don't really believe to do so is particularly honoring. As an honoring event, celebrating the blood sacrifice, death, and resurrection of Messiah Yeshua, or Jesus, at the time of Passover, to me, has no equivalency. That should be really our primary Christian feast observance of the year would be Passover, in my opinion. Again, you may ask, what prompted this whole conversation? Well, it's funny because I got a Hallmark Christmas card. I say put Christmas in quotes. Christmas card. It made no reference to Jesus. It did convey the idea that Christmas has an identity. It treated Christmas like an idol, saying, quote, "Let Christmas come into our world and bring us all together." Yeah, it's a wonderful thought, but it's pretty humanistic, as I will point out here. Christmas is sort of a universal symbol. I believe that's what it's become. Potentially an idol to pagan and Christian alike, unfortunately. Many will celebrate the day, giving it only some humanistic, mystical value. I'd like to defend Christmas. It offends me that Christmas is disabused, so to speak. Even with its dubious genesis, I'd still like to defend it, particularly against those who see it merely as an emoji for the humanistic qualities of faith, hope, and love. I thought that was kind of cute. Christmas has kind of become an emoji. The abuse in this context offends me. The hundreds and hundreds of years, this is what we're trying to overcome. The hundreds and hundreds of years of tradition is not easily dismissed. But to observe what is not true does not permit one to engage with the day as a God-honoring event of Jesus' birth, nor to defend it as such. I guess integrity just won't let me do that. So to engage in the love of family, that certainly is God-honoring. It's a God-honoring event to praise Son, Spirit, and Father for sustaining me for another year and making provision that I can share is a blessing to be observed. So God can be in Christmas. I don't know what this thing is, keeps coming up there. God can be in Christmas if we just don't try to make it more than it has a right to be. I suggest that maybe we might even consider changing the name of the annual event. Well, that's it. I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. I know that it's controversial, to say the least. So, have a blessed family time this season. We certainly are going to. We look forward to the family time. Blessings on you. Thanks for watching.